You wake to the scent of scorched earth, not firewood, not cooking fires, something fouler, flesh. Burning homes, the kind of smoke that seeps into your lungs and never leaves. You hear the shrill cry of a woman, not far, and then silence. Even the birds have gone quiet. Only the boots remain, marching, distant, rhythmic, unstoppable. You don't know it yet, but you are in the town of Batak, 1876. A Christian village nestled in the Rhodope Mountains of Ottoman-ruled Bulgaria. The spring air is thick with fear, and in the shadow of collapsing empire and rising revolt, your village is about to vanish from the map and from memory. This is not a war. It is something darker. You crouch behind a wooden cart, clutching your younger brother as horsemen ride in, red fezes bright against the green hills. They do not speak. They do not shout. They simply begin. Bayonets gleam. A child stumbles from a doorway, screaming for his mother. A shot rings out. The sound echoes off the stone chapel, still full of families who thought God would protect them. He doesn't. Inside that chapel, over 3,000 souls are packed like cattle. You smell sweat, dust, and the metallic sting of terror. Women whisper prayers. Infants wail. You hear the villagers sing softly, hymns in Old Church Slavonic. It's not courage, it's surrender. Because outside, the Ottoman irregulars known as the Bashi Bazouks have surrounded the building. You've heard stories about them. Mercenaries, bandits in imperial clothing, not trained soldiers, wild men, given permission to kill. And they have. In Stara Zagora, in Perushtitsa, now here, in Batak. You close your eyes as they set the roof alight. Some try to escape through the windows. A mother tosses her child out before climbing after him. Both are cut down. You see it. You cannot forget it. The chapel becomes an oven. The voices inside rise in unison, first in prayer, then in agony, then in silence. The massacre lasts for days. The smoke is longer. And then, the world forgets. No foreign army comes. No tribunal. The Ottoman government claims the massacre was exaggerated, an unfortunate overreaction, they call it. But you are one of the few who survive, and you remember every second. What happened in Batak was not a battle. It was a message, a warning, a punishment. It was meant to silence the Bulgarian uprising against Ottoman rule, to crush a people's desire for independence with the weight of horror. But it failed. The uprising had begun in April 1876. Small, scattered, desperate, Bulgarian revolutionaries armed with little more than muskets and hope. Their rebellion was doomed. They knew it. But they believed if they rose, the world would see. Europe would intervene. The Ottomans would be forced to reform. They did rise, and the Ottomans did respond, with iron, with fire, with massacres like Batak. Tales spread, not by the Ottomans but by Western journalists. Among them, Januarius McGann, an American correspondent for the London Daily News. He entered Batak weeks later. What he saw broke him. He described the skeletal remains of children fused in piles of ash, skulls cracked open like fruit, dogs feeding on corpses, the stench unbearable, the silence haunting. His dispatch ignited international outrage. But it was too late for Batak. McGahan's words helped trigger what came next, a diplomatic storm across Europe. Russia, watching closely, found its opportunity. In 1877, war was declared. The Russo-Turkish War. It would end with the Treaty of San Stefano and later the Congress of Berlin. Bulgaria would gain autonomy. The Ottomans would lose more than land. They would lose their legitimacy in the eyes of many. But the people of Batak did not celebrate. They rebuilt. They mourned. They buried their dead in mass graves under the ruins of their church. The same church now stands as a crypt. Visitors walk barefoot through it. Candles flicker where fire once raged. Every stone is soaked with memory. And yet, few outside Bulgaria know its name. Why was the Batak massacre forgotten? Partly because history is written by victors and silenced by those embarrassed by the truth. The Ottoman Empire, in its twilight years, clung to narratives of civilization and progress, especially for Western eyes. Admitting such atrocities meant admitting decay, partly because the West, even in its outrage, moved on. The great powers had greater games to play. Geopolitical chess, strategic interests. Bulgaria's suffering became a tool, a temporary scandal, and partly because it was inconvenient. Batak wasn't a battlefield. It didn't fit romantic notions of noble war. It was a massacre of civilians, of women, children, priests, by irregulars acting with tacit imperial consent. It revealed the underbelly of empire, the consequences of repression, and the cruelty bred by fear. Today, the massacre remains a deep scar in the Bulgarian soul, commemorated, taught, but still unknown to much of the world. Even in academic circles, debates linger. Was it exaggerated? Were the death tolls inflated? Did Russia use it for propaganda? These questions matter, but they must never obscure the truth. Because you can still smell the ash in the walls of the chapel, you can still feel the blood in the soil, and you can still hear the silence where songs once rose. The massacre of Batak was not just a tragedy. It was a warning about what happens when power feels threatened and vengeance is given a flag, about what empires do when their grip begins to slip, and about the cost of being forgotten. But history does not forget forever. And now, you know. You walk now through Batak, not as a terrified child but as a visitor, centuries later. The mountains haven't changed. The light still softens the stone walls. The river still runs quietly beneath the bridge where executions once took place. But time has folded itself here. The past is not behind you, it is beside you. In the center of the village stands the Church of St. Nedelia. It looks small, modest, almost fragile, but when you step inside, the air thickens. The light grows dim. You hear nothing but your breath, and the imagined echoes of those trapped in this very room, as flames danced across the rafters, and screams clawed their way up the walls. No embellishment is needed. The evidence is everywhere. Blood-blackened floorboards, charred icons, the ossuary below. Over 1,200 skeletons were recovered. Not all were whole. Some were scorched fragments. Some were fused together. Mothers with children still in their arms. Here, history is not something you read. It is something you feel. Yet for decades, what happened in Batak lived in a strange tension between memory and denial. Bulgarian national identity, forged in suffering and resistance, made Batak sacred. But to the international community, it became a footnote, swallowed by the grand narratives of war and empire. And for the Ottoman Empire, it was an uncomfortable stain. Official reports downplayed the brutality. The Bashi bazooks were labeled uncontrolled or undisciplined, their violence framed as unfortunate excess, not sanctioned terror. But that's a convenient lie. The irregulars were deployed for precisely this purpose, plausible deniability. They were the fire the empire could unleash and disown. And so for years, Batak drifted in a gray space, too horrific to forget, too politically sensitive to confront. But history, like grief, demands reckoning, and it comes slowly. In 2007, a scandal erupts. A group of Bulgarian anthropologists publishing under a cultural theory project suggests that the Batak massacre is more myth than memory, an invented national trauma. Their aim, they claim, is to challenge nationalism and re-examine how history is constructed. But to the people of Batak, it is an open wound, salted anew. Mass protests erupt. Scholars are denounced. The museum exhibits are defended. Survivors' descendants speak out. Batak is not a metaphor. It is not a symbol to be debated in a university hall. It is a place. It is a fact. It is a graveyard. And for Bulgarians, it is a cornerstone of identity. A moment when their ancestors stood alone, bled alone, and died alone, while Europe watched. This response is not just emotional, it's generational. Because to forget Batak is to erase a truth far older than any political regime. It is to silence the voices that cried out in that chapel. And that, they say, must never happen. The massacre becomes more than history. It becomes memory weaponized, not by politics but by the simple human need to be seen, to be heard, to matter. Because in every nation there are stories like this, stories buried, stories denied, stories too painful to remember and too dangerous to forget, stories that shape the soul of a people. The Batak massacre is one of them, and now it lives again, not to reopen old wounds, but to remind us what power does when unchecked, what silence allows, and how even the smallest village can become a symbol, not just of pain, but of endurance. So the next time you hear the word massacre, don't think only of famous battles and empires rising and falling. Think of Batak, of its chapel, of its silence. Because some ghosts don't ask to be remembered, they demand it. You step outside the church, the sun stings your eyes. Life has returned to Batak. The streets are quiet, yes, but they are not empty. You pass school children in uniform, elders sitting under trees, a wedding photo being taken by the lake, a town rebuilt, not erased. But under every footstep, under every stone, history murmurs. You ask yourself, how did the world allow this to happen? The answer, like all in history, lies not in one moment, but in the slow convergence of many. The Ottoman Empire in the 19th century was a leviathan in decline. Known once as the sick man of Europe, its internal fractures had deepened. Ethnic unrest, nationalist movements, economic stagnation, Western imperial pressures, and at its heart, a fear, not just of revolution, but of disintegration. The Bulgarian April Uprising of 1876 wasn't the first rebellion, but it struck a nerve. The Ottomans viewed it not as a protest, but as treason. And in response, they unleashed fury, not with regular troops bound by codes of war, but with mercenaries, fanatics, and criminals. The Bashi bazooks were not just soldiers, they were weapons. Their brutality was the point. This was psychological warfare, designed to teach a lesson so savage no province would dare rise again. And yet, it backfired, because what began as a massacre became a mirror. Journalists like Magahan showed Europe the face of unchecked empire. Artists painted scenes of charred children and desecrated churches. Newspapers ran illustrations of Ottoman cruelty. Sympathy turned to outrage. Outrage turned to politics. And Russia listened. Ostensibly motivated by Slavic brotherhood and Orthodox solidarity, the Russian Empire saw its chance. In 1877, it declared war on the Ottomans, casting itself as the avenger of Batak. The war was brutal. The Russian army advanced through the Balkans, suffering staggering losses, but eventually forcing peace on its own terms. The Treaty of San Stefano was born, and with it, the autonomy of Bulgaria. But diplomacy is never pure. At the Congress of Berlin later that year, the great powers, Britain, Austria-Hungary, France, and others, sliced the Balkans into spheres of influence. Bulgaria's newfound freedom was rolled back, split into regions, tethered once again to Ottoman suzerainty. Batak had not been forgotten. It had been leveraged, a bargaining chip on a table of empires. And so while Bulgaria would gain full independence decades later, Batak remained a wound, not only of violence but of betrayal. For the villagers, liberation had not come as salvation. It came late, after the flames, after the ashes. Today, the story of Batak poses a question that echoes across centuries. What is the value of human life in the ledger books of power? Because history is not just made by kings and sultans, treaties and wars. It is made by screams in forgotten churches, by parents shielding children from bullets, by survivors rebuilding homes over bones, and by you remembering. If you were to visit Batak today, you'd find a museum near the chapel. Small, solemn. Inside are photographs, grainy, black and white, of villagers posed stiffly beside mass graves. You'd see rusted weapons, embroidered garments recovered from the ruins, and a single scorched Bible, half burned, its pages still legible. You'd also see something strange, a small mirror nailed to the wall, just beneath a child's skull. It has no plaque, no explanation. But when you look into it, you understand, because history is not just behind glass, it is in your reflection. The massacre of Batak was meant to silence. Instead, it became a testimony to cruelty, to resistance, and to memory, fragile, defiant, and if we choose, eternal. So when we speak of empires, let us also speak of villages. When we remember sultans and czars, let us remember mothers and children. And when we retell the story of Batak, let it not be as a forgotten massacre, but as a warning. Before you go, if this story moved you, like this video to keep history alive. Subscribe for more untold truths, lost voices, and the forgotten corners of our past. And in the comments below, tell us, what stories do you believe history has tried to bury? Your voice keeps memories from fading. See you in my next Untold History, with love and respect.